Hello, and welcome to this edition of Mother Earth News and Friends. With me today, I have Ben Vanheems. He uh, works with GrowVeg and their garden planner there, and he's a lifelong gardener. Wrote the book GrowVeg, and he's an educator on all things horticulture. As he will share today, simple steps you need to consider when planting your vegetable garden this year. Thanks for being here today, Ben.
Thank you very much, Josh, for that introduction, and it's a real pleasure to join you all today. I'm excited. It's the start of a new year, and more importantly than that, a new growing season. So I'm really excited to be here today to kind of answer any questions and just to get us all enthused for the coming season.
Great, thanks. And so we're going to play a short presentation from Ben, and then he'll come back and answer any questions. If you have any resolution issues today, just check your resolution of the gear on the bottom right of the streaming there on our Mother Earth News website. It's a little bit different if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube. And then if you have any issues seeing anything on the screen, then we'll have a higher resolution in the recording. You can check anything you can't see later. So without any further ado, here's the presentation, and we'll see you later, Ben.
See you in a bit.
All right.
Well, hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for this garden planning workshop. I'm going to take you through the things that I consider each time I plan my plot. But first, I thought it might be quite fun just to give you a little bit of an overview of laying out the vegetable garden in terms of positioning in sun and shade, but also to show you how I actually started my vegetable garden. Now, the first things to consider when laying out the vegetable garden are, of course, sun and shade. Most vegetables like as much sunshine as you can give them, so I would aim for somewhere that gets at least 6 hours of direct sunshine a day, ideally 8 hours or more. So see where the shadows fall throughout the course of the day and aim your garden to be popped into that sunny prime position. Now, of course, remember that overhanging trees and shrubs that may not be in leaf in winter will come out into leaf in spring, and that will obviously cast shade, so bear that in mind as well. Although, of course, in the summer, you'll get a lot more hours of direct sunshine. Now, of course, if you can't find the perfectly sunny spot, don't worry, there are plenty of crops that can cope with a little bit of shade. Things like any of the brassicas like cabbage and kale, salad leaves, and even things like carrots, which will appreciate a bit of sunshine in the morning, but can cope with shade in the afternoon. So there are options. The other thing to bear in mind is exposure. So is your garden going to get clobbered by winds, or is it relatively sheltered? If your garden is quite exposed, then you can think about incorporating some sort of shelter like a hedge or shrubbery or temporary kind of upright netting solutions. A little bit of airflow, though, is no bad thing and will help to kind of keep pests and diseases blowing through rather than sitting and kind of getting opportunity. So it's not all bad. And then there's, of course, soil conditions as well. We want ideally to have soil that is relatively well drained but holds on to moisture as well, the kind of Goldilocks zone. Few soils are perfect, and the great thing is that as gardeners we can do a lot to improve our soil, no matter what it is, simply by adding good organic matter. And that just means things like garden made compost or manure that's well rotted and from a trusted source. So let me show you how I laid out my vegetable garden. So I have a sloping site. It isn't ideal because that makes all the water kind of drain off, but on the upside it is sloping towards the sunshine, the area I chose. So my first job was to kind of terrace the site, and the easiest way for me to do that was to use raised beds. Now I find that raised beds are generally a good idea because they help the soil within it to drain through a little bit quicker in the spring, which means the soil will warm up maybe 1 or even 2 weeks sooner. So it gives you a little bit of a head start. I also like the fact that raised beds are nice and orderly. They give very clearly defined growing areas. So that's why I like them. So in my sloping garden, I have to kind of dig into the slope a little bit, and then I pop the raised beds into position and kind of either dig them down a bit more on the sort of hill facing side, or build it up on this sort of the bottom end of the slope, if you like. And for me, I find using pallet collars are really useful because they're already made and constructed, and I can just kind of literally plonk them into place and go. So what to fill raised beds with? Well, to be honest, anything that's organic, and that means of origin that was once living. So that does include compost, because that's just broken down plants and so on, manures, even things like sticks and kitchen scraps. So for my beds, to save a little bit of money, I filled it with offcuts of prunings and just kind of general kitchen waste I had. Then in went a nice layer of lumpy manure that was still well rotted. And then I finished off with a kind of skim, if you like, of really beautiful, friable and crumbly compost. This was all bought in, the compost and manure in bulk bags, but you only have to do that once to fill the beds, and then year after year, you can just add a little bit of garden-made compost onto the top each year just to top up that fertility. And to keep the weeds from poking up through the bottom, I just laid the bed first of all with some cardboard. Once the beds were in place, I could turn my attention to the paths. Now, of course, you need to think about paths when you are positioning the raised beds so that you leave enough width between the beds for your paths. I like to leave enough space that I can easily walk down along the paths with a wheelbarrow without getting clobbered either side by overhanging foliage. So for that, you need to think maybe at least sort of 90 centimetres, 3 foot, or kind of 4 foot might be ideal. And my bed width, I go for a maximum width of 4 foot, which means I can easily reach from the paths into the middle of the bed without stepping on the soil in the bed. And that's nice because it means that the soil structure isn't sort of pushed down. Now for my paths, I like to line those with cardboard as well, and then finish with a nice layer of wood chips. Wood chips are really great because they're organic matter as well, so eventually they'll start to break down and roots can access them from the surrounding beds and draw on more nutrition. But I've found they also offer a valuable home for pest predators like ground beetles. They kind of love it in there in the cool of those wood chips. And I find that if I just scrape them back a bit, I'll always see little bugs and beneficial things that will help to control, for example, the slug population. You could use just let your paths go to grass or just mud, but my climate is incredibly wet and it can turn to a kind of muddy mess. So I like that sort of cleanliness that comes with wood chips. Okay, now the really exciting part is placing the plants. So let's go ahead and do that. Now I'm going to take you through a 10-step process that I use in my garden, and it's all quite logical. But the first thing we're going to start with, and hopefully you can see it now, is my garden plan as it stands currently. Now there are some plants in here already. These are the perennial plants. So I've got all of my fruit trees and bushes, for example. I've got my herbs down here, my herb bed. I've got a lovely block of asparagus over here. And then these sunchokes or Jerusalem artichokes. So I need to think, am I happy with this? All's good, but I'm going to remove these sunchokes here because they were kind of so tall that they rather dominated this space. I'm going to dig those up and start afresh with those. So number one on my planned placement are my sun worshippers, the warm season crops that need plenty of warmth on direct sunshine. So these guys get the absolute prime real estate. I'm going to start with my favourite, and probably a lot of people's favourite, some tomatoes. So I've got enough room for about 4 plants here. Could probably squeeze in 6, but I'm going to add some flowers, so we'll get to that bit in a moment. I've always got to have corn, and I love specifically sweet varieties of corn. Absolutely delicious. You can't beat homegrown because you can cut them and get them straight into the kitchen to cook. And they're super fresh like that. Next up, some zucchini. Let's zoom in here and pop in here. So the great thing about this, I'm going to grow 4 plants in this bed. And that means I'm going to get really good cross-pollination between the plants. I find you get much better fruit set this way if you grow 2, 3 or more plants close together. One plant, and I do find that they struggle to kind of pollinate and set fruit. So that's our kind of most of our warm season staples in there. This bottom of the plan here is south facing. It's the south. So I'm putting the taller plants at the back here. So the corn is at the back. It won't overshadow the kind of shorter plants in front. Kind of very similar in our next step is vertical or climbing crops. Now, obviously corn is one of those, but we've got others, haven't we? So we've got, for example, winter squash. I'm actually going to plant this year some gourds, and they're going to trail up here, and I'm going to try some bottleneck gourds, and sort of something a bit unusual to kind of really create a bit of an eye-catching kind of attraction here. They'll need something to grow up, so I'm going to add an object, and I think we need some sort of obelisk, so let's give them one each and drop them in there. There we go. While we're here, I'm also going to get an obelisk for this bed over here, because what I'm going to pop in here are some lovely fresh garden cucumbers. Let's go back here, cucumber, and we can probably get 2 plants easily here onto that. So let's drop them in as well. And something as well I really like is to add colour, and we'll add some more flowers later on, but while we're talking about vertical interest, I'm going to add some sweet peas. Sweet peas are great for attracting all sorts of wildlife, but I also think they're really great for you know, a posy of flowers, if you like, for oh, hang on, here we are. Oh, that's it. Silly me. Right, so we need there we go. Let's scroll down here. What do we need? We need some teepees. That's the one. So let's get a bamboo teepee here. I'll stretch it out a bit. That's more realistic for this corner here. And then we can go back and get our sweet peas on. So I'll just pop sort of various ones along the edge here, and they'll all grow up and kind of cover this in with an absolute wall of colour. So yeah, as I say, I love sweet peas because as well as adding colour, you can have like a fresh cut flowers at a moment's notice, and they're great for when you're visiting friends, or for example, and you can take a little posy of flowers with you from your garden. It's a really personal way of adding something, you know, on a trip. I've also got these lovely arches here that span the beds, and they make a real feature in my garden because I grow stuff up them and they dangle down. So I tend to grow climbing beans, so pole beans here. So I can usually get 3 or 4 plants onto each side. Let's cut and paste that over here. And then I do the same down here as well. I grow 2 different types of beans each year. And so I'll grow fine or French beans, and then kind of what I call runner beans on another arch. And that way you get 2 types, and they dangle down from the top of the arch. They look really attractive like that, and they create that beautiful, beautiful vertical interest. So let's zoom out. We're already getting quite a good looking plan, I think. So I think we're ready for our next stage. And I think it's one of those trouble areas, and it's shade. So our shady characters, I call them. So these are plants that will cope with some shade, and that it usually includes most of the brassicas. And my favourite, or rather my daughter's favourite, is broccoli. So we always grow broccoli, and I can usually get a couple of sort of crops of broccoli in any one season like that. And then down here, this whole area is a little bit shaded by some tall trees just to the right of the plan here. We need our leafy greens, so let's add in some chard. Chard is a fantastic plant because it's almost like a perennial. It can last a year and you just keep on cutting it and the leaves keep on coming. And a close second for me is kale. And I like to grow the kind of Cavolo Nero style kale. So there we go. We've got a lovely bed of leafy greens and a lovely bed of beautiful broccoli. Other shady crops to consider, by the way, would be pretty much any of the leafy salads, spring onions or salad onions rather, things like radishes, and as I say, carrots and beets will cope with a little bit of shade as well. So I think we're ready for our next kind of item on the agenda, which are our sprawlers. Now, these are really space-hungry plants that kind of sprawl out and could potentially dominate by sprawling into nearby crops. So the logical thing in that instance is to put them towards the edge of your plot. So I love my winter squash, but if I put them in the middle here, then they're going to kind of potentially kind of get in the way and get in the paths and so on. That's probably not a big problem, but they will hinder kind of moving around. So let's put them to the edge here. So I can get 2 plants here, like that. So I could, for example, add a couple of obelisks here to grow them up, and that would solve the solution of them sprawling. But here they can sprawl out like this direction onto the grass here, and I can kind of like train them by kind of sticking sticks in the ground to kind of coax the stems along and out so they're not sort of dominating and getting in. Right, I think that's probably it for my sprawlers. Now it's time to position the rest of my crops. So these are our staple crops. Things like potatoes, root crops, onions, and so on. So let's zoom in down here, and I'm going to start with more legumes. So I love beans. You can never have enough beans, and you can always store them. So got our runner beans and our French beans, our climbers, but let's add a couple of rows of fava beans here. Fava beans are great. They're really satisfying to shell, and they usually finish cropping by kind of midsummer, so I can then replace that with a follow-on crop later on in the summer. Peas, of course. Let's pot in a couple of double rows there. So we stretch that out. There we go. We got a double row there. And we got room for another one. So I cut and paste, pop another row there like that. There we go. I've got a daughter in the house and she loves picking pods. So this is a great project for her. She'll get on and shell these, and I might kind of freeze any excess that we have, although usually they get eaten straight away. Next up, my favorite bowl of all is garlic. I love garlic. It stores for ages, and you can often have it going through to kind of the following spring, like April time. So it's really worth growing. You get a lot of plants in quite a small space, and it does save quite a bit of money on grocery store bought garlic. And then onions, of course. Let's do a double row over here. This here, I'm actually growing shallots as my main onion or shallot duo. So I've only got probably room for a couple of rows there, but that's fine. Let's get our shallots in. There we are. And they're going in this bed here. These are actually already in the ground because I've chose some autumn planted shallots. So there they are. And I love shallots because, like garlic, they store for ages as well. And I think they got a better flavour than onions. Root crops, let's get them in. Carrots, got to have your carrots. Let's do a little block of them there. And then, of course, fresh beets. You can't beat them, can you? Pun intended, sorry. There we are. There we are. See the overlapping here, so let me just reduce that a bit. And the great thing is with this garden planner is that it automatically adjusts. So you can see if I slim it further, look, we've lost a row of carrots, but I bring it out and it's sprung back. So it calculates exactly how many. So it makes planning really easy. Potatoes, but not just any potatoes, it's got to be early season potatoes, otherwise called new potatoes. Now, these are the sort of smaller potatoes that have a lovely creamy kind of waxy texture, and they're really lovely in salads. These are earlier in sort of maybe June or early July. So again, this bed will be vacated and replaced with something like winter hardy brassicas or possibly leeks. You'll notice here I've got 3 pots that I use each year now, and these are for growing my main crop potatoes. So pop them in there. Now I like to choose a blight resistant variety so they don't get kind of clobbered, because late season or main crop potatoes are a little bit more vulnerable to blight. So I've chosen 3 pots of blight resistant potatoes, and I can, once they've finished, cut them back and just simply move the whole pot under cover into my shed or outbuilding, where they will stay frost free, and I can then just enjoy them as I need them. So it's a clever way of kind of keeping them in storage like that. Okay, let's see, am I missing anything from my staple crops? I think we're all good. Well, we'll think if there's something else comes to us, we'll get round to it. But next up are my heavy drinkers. Now that might raise an eyebrow, but I'm not talking about hitting the wine, of course. I'm talking about heavy drinkers that really love water. And the thirstiest crop of all is celery. So why do they get their own sort of classification, if you like? It's because I put heavy drinkers in one bed, and that makes it a lot easier to kind of water them in one hit. So I'm also putting bulb fennel here. That's quite a thirsty crop, and it grows fine in dry conditions, but I find it bolts or goes to flower, and that means you don't get a good bulb. So they need really good watering to avoid that. So I've got 2 thirsty crops here, the heavy drinkers, and I can give them one go with the hose pipe or watering can, and it just makes it a much more efficient watering process rather than nipping about all over the garden and trying to sort of keep them all happy. Similarly, thirsty crops, salads, and that kind of takes us on to our next kind of group of crops as well, which are the kind of convenience crops. Convenience crops, are basically the crops that I need to harvest more regularly, that I kind of nip out and get on a sort of daily basis. So that includes my herb bed here, and my house is just in the bottom left corner here, just off screen. And so I've got the back door here, down there, and I can nip out, grab a sprig of thyme, for example, or harvest my salads as and when I need them. So it just makes it a lot easier than if I was to locate them at the back here. It just makes it a little bit more of an obstacle to go and get them. So convenience crops near the house. And again, these are thirsty too, so it makes it easy to water them in one go, my salads. So I'm going to start with a couple of rows of loose leaf lettuce, or just one row, let's say. There we are. And I love spinach, beautiful creamy leaves that are great in sort of stir frying, or I actually have them raw in smoothies for their vitamin content. And let's add some salad onions. Onions, here we are, green onions, that's what we need. Couple of rows of them, like that. And a lot of these salads, of course, are really, really fast growing. So it means that some of them will be gone within sort of 2 months of sowing, certainly the radishes here. And it means that I can re-sow throughout the season and just get multiple crops from the same space. And this is some endive to finish here. So that's a really good looking bed. I've got radish, endive, my green onions, spinach, and my salad leaves. And it's near the house. I can nip out and get them at a moment's notice. And you'll notice a gap here. That's because I grow annual herbs as well, or herbs, I should say, for you guys. And here we go. So let's pop in some cilantro there. There we go. So I get lovely fresh leaves to start with from the cilantro. Then as kind of midsummer arrives, they flower, which is fine, because you can use the flowers to pretty up dishes. and then I get the seed heads or the coriander. So it's almost like 3 crops in one. So there we are. That is our edibles all positioned, but you may notice these little gaps here, either side of the beans here. We're missing something. Well, it's time, drum roll please, for some flower power. So let's switch over to flowers on the drop-down menu here to clear that. And I'm going to populate the plan with flowers. Now, I probably don't need to tell you this. You probably know this already, but flowers are so valuable for attracting beneficial bugs, pollinators, as well as pest predators. So far from being a kind of quote-unquote waste of space, they are so valuable to enhancing how our garden functions. So I'm going to start here. These are low-growing French marigolds, and I'm going to just add a kind of like a few of them here at the bottom of our tomatoes, and I find they kind of form an understory of tomatoes because these are kind of indeterminate or cordon types. So that's a good start there. Let's add 2 there because we've got the room. Stretch that out. There we are. Perfect. I like symmetry, so I'm going to add another kind of block of marigolds there, either side of this sort of central path. And yeah, calendula is another one, and you can actually eat the flowers of calendula in kind of salads, or just pull apart the petals, and they add a beautiful splash of colour. So again, for symmetry, I'm going to kind of make a mirror image of them. We've got a gap over here. Let's go for my favourite edible flower, which is the nasturtium. Now, nasturtiums, you can eat every single piece of a nasturtium. The leaves, the flowers, the stems, even the roots if you were particularly keen, and the seed pods too. So they give a lovely peppery tang to salads, and I reckon that's definitely worth including. We've got space here for we've got space here for nasturtiums, and some of these will grow up the supports alongside the cucumbers too. So let's pop them in there. I grow a mix of climbing types and kind of bushier clump forming types. This is the front of the garden that's visible from the house. So I think it's worth growing some flowers kind of alongside, just in front of the beds like this. Let's add some more there. That'll do us for now. And I'm missing something, aren't I? It has to be my sweet Alison. This is the absolute favourite flower for little tiny insects. So tiny wasps or hoverflies, lacewings, they love the flowers. And these types of insects are definitely, without a doubt, the most sort of prolific when it comes to eating your unwanted pests like aphids or even caterpillars. So it's worth including plenty of these. Now, I've got these on my plan in fairly specific locations, but this is kind of the flowers, the things I fit in towards the end. As long as I've left roughly enough space in the beds, then I'm quite happy to kind of just hang on, let's copy that. Just to kind of slot them in as and when by eye when the time comes, because I know I've got plenty of space here, and I'll always have leftovers, so I sort of include them up front here. So I'll probably have some calendulas, for example. So let's put some more up here like that, put a little block of them. Okay, so I'm sure I'll be adding more flowers, but that'll do for now. Sorry, apologies, I'm getting ahead of myself. One more flower, borage. The blue flowers are really tasty, really pretty, and it's another bumblebee attractant. So those are worth including, and they self-seed really well. So I find that they just come back year after year, and if you don't want them in a particular place, you can just pull them up and or replant them. And the same goes actually for the poached eggplant, which is a beautiful little plant with tiny sort of poached egg style, like sunny side up flowers. Okay, that's it. That's the plan. So there are all my flowers in place. and I'm pretty happy with that. So it's a good looking plan. It's got lots of flowers. It's going to be attractive. It's going to be productive. It's going to be alive with the industry and buzz of insects visiting all the flowers. I am really happy with that. And later, once I perfected my plan, I can go in and sort of add my in-ground dates. So I'll just show you how to do that. I'm going to specify in-ground dates. The fava beans are going to be planted end of February, and then they'll be out of the ground by probably the end of June. So if I set that, and now I view my plan up here, look, after that, in July, you can see there's a gap there, so that I can then, what I can do is go ahead and choose something that's going to be able to grow from July onwards. And I'll just show you an example of that. If I go to, here we go, so I could do suitable for autumn planting, and then I could, let's just pick a vegetables there. Then I could pick something like arugula, for example. That's a really great crop to sow and grow from late summer. I could then put that in. So for now, let's just view our plan back in May time. Let's get rid of the arugula. Anyway, that's just an example. So our final two things on my 10-step plan are nourishing plants. So that I mean anything that's going to help improve the growth of our plants. So let's add in, what do we need? Well, we need a compost heap, don't we? So composting, we got 6 options here. I like a wooden compost bin, usually made from old pallets. I'll pop it up here next to these nettles, which are a good source of greens to add. So they're roughly about 3 or 4 foot, aren't they? So that should do it. I like a double bayed compost bin, so as one's maturing, I can add more stuff to the other. There'll be other things as well, that including provision for water. My greenhouse is off the plan here, so I have water barrels attached to it, but and my spigot or faucet sort of off site as well. But if you can, it's worth adding kind of provision for collecting water as close to your garden as you can. The other thing to consider is number 10 on my 10-step plan, which is provision for protecting seedlings. And by that I mean like a halfway house between somewhere warm and protected, like a sunny windowsill or a greenhouse, and your outside bed, so you can acclimatize plants to conditions before you plant them. So I think the best thing for that is a cold frame. So I'm going to do I've got a frame like about that size. Let's orientate it round like that. We can pop it there close to the plants, close to the bed, so I can then pop my seedlings and young plants in here, keep the lid open during the day, shut it at night, and just kind of gradually leave the lid open for longer and longer as I acclimatize the seedlings to the nearby conditions out here, and then I can go ahead and transplant them. So there we go. Let's zoom out, and there we go. So you got all the plan there, and I love this garden planner because it's so colourful. It just looks so good, and the great thing is I can save this now. There we are, and I can go back, twiddle and tweak with it as much as I like, and you can see the plant list here is all ready to go with my indoor sowing dates in blue, my outdoor sowing or planting dates, and when I'm going to be able to harvest my plants. And as I add to it, well, you'll see that this will obviously adapt as well. So that's it. Thank you so much, everyone. And I'm really looking forward to your questions.
Well, thanks for that, Ben, and excited to hear what sort of questions folks have.
Fantastic. Yeah, thanks so much. See, there's quite a few comments and questions on the comment section. So I'm just going to go through some of them now. So thank you so much for these questions. So Greg, you've asked what can you do if your whole yard is shaded? Well, I mentioned briefly right at the start that there are some crops that will cope with shade. The main ones that will cope with shade are ones that don't produce too many fruits or pods, that just produce leaves, or that produce roots and so on. So really that means any kind of leafy green like chard or kale, all of the cabbage family plants. So that includes things like cauliflower and broccoli, and I had great success with cauliflower last year in quite a shady spot, actually. Salad onions, leeks, scallions, and garlic, even to a certain extent. And also leafy herbs like parsley and cilantro. But something else you could consider, Greg, is if somewhere gets a little bit of sun and then it's sort of higher up, you might be able to grow beans that sort of climb up into the light so that they kind of like grow up into the sunshine. And if there are areas that get a little bit of sunshine at a certain time of day, you might be able to sort of grow things like carrots and beets, for example. So there are clever ways around it. But at the very least, you should be able to grow leafy greens and salads and anything in the cabbage family. Great. So Tim has asked, what compost arrangement do you recommend for a small space? So I think space is sort of irrelevant, really. I think any garden will benefit from additions of organic matter. So that includes really well-rotted manure from a trusted source or good quality compost. So even in a smaller space, then some good quality compost will really help things along. If you're growing in pots or containers because you've just got a sort of really small yard and it's mainly paved, for example, then you might be looking at kind of a good quality potting mix to fill those containers, perhaps with a few bits of compost added in to kind of enrich it, or a kind of organic slow release kind of fertilizer, something like that. Sharon has a question that's I really love this question because I think it's so important to pollinators. How would I incorporate crops to attract pollinators? So Sharon hopefully demonstrated some flowers there that I really recommend. So there's sort of three options here. There's flowers that you just incorporate wherever there are spaces. And my go-to flowers are, as I mentioned, sweet alyssum, poached eggplant. There's also zinnia and cosmos, marigolds, borage. But then there are flowering herbs. So you're getting something productive, but you let them flower, and then they're a real boon for things like hoverflies and lacewings. So that might be, for example, cilantro or parsley, basil eventually when that flowers, and all sorts of rosemary, oregano. Flowering herbs, and obviously you get a lovely addition to the kitchen for that too. And then there are vegetables that flower. So even like growing beans and things like flowering globe artichokes, these will in their own right attract pollinating insects as well. So if you want to help pollinators out, which is so important, then including some crops that naturally flower in order to produce the thing that we harvest, whether it's the pods or so on, is a great way to help them along. So yeah, just a few ideas. Wilma asks, why do I prefer these beds? Well, there's absolutely nothing wrong with growing in the ground, and growing in the ground is arguably more accessible than growing in raised beds, because you don't need to obviously install the raised beds. But for me specifically, my site's quite sloped. It faces the sun, so that's a benefit. But if I'm growing in ground, it's sort of, you get the sort of slippage, and we get really heavy rain where I am, and it's wet a lot of the time. Growing in raised beds means I can sort of get that nice flat surface so the water doesn't run off. And also because it's very wet, it means it drains through, because the bed's raised up above the ground. When it rains hard, it can drain through, and that means it drains through quicker in spring, which means it warms up. So a drier soil will sort of warm up quicker in the spring. Obviously, if you are in a very hot, dry climate, then maybe raised beds isn't the thing for you. But for me, in my very specific situation, they're great. I'm also a bit of a, I like order, and they just look really pleasing, that symmetry, but that's just maybe says something about me. So Peg asks, what software am I using? Well, I'm using the garden planner, which is available through Mother Earth News. So what I'll do is I'll well, someone can cut and paste the website link to that, so you can kind of have a look. Oh, there we go. Look, thank you, Josh. You can have a look and see the sort of benefits of the garden planner. I would say it, wouldn't I? Because I'm actively involved with it, but I genuinely love using it because it's so beautiful to use. It's very colourful, but it's got these really powerful features. I didn't get a chance to demonstrate all of them today, but one of the things is companion plants. So if I quickly share screen with you, I can just kind of show you that actually. Here we are. Great. So hopefully you can see that now. There we go. Great. So but yeah, one of the really great things is here's the plan we've just put together. If I click on a plant, let's say these zucchinis here. So I'm going to click on that. It's highlighted now, and then I can show companions. And look at that, it narrows down plants that are beneficial to companions, beneficial companion plants to those zucchini. Another great feature I love is the kind of all the various filters. So there's filters there for partial shade tolerance, frost tolerant, that are easy to grow. So there's it's really kind of a very sort of strong functions there that makes it a joy to use. And the other thing is that it remembers what you've grown year on year, so that it can flash up and show you, oh, I planted that last year. It sort of flashes red, and that red flash kind of decreases in intensity as you go on through the years. So if you want to do crop rotation, then that helps with that. Eric, a really great question here, Eric. I love this. So can you give 3 or 4 crops you'd recommend that it'll give an easy yields that are great for, I guess, beginners? I mean, it's really hard to narrow it down, but my kind of go-tos for both easy growing and higher yields has to be zucchini, just because once they get going, they really push out fruits and they're pretty bomb-proof. Beans, especially climbing beans, very prolific so long as you keep picking them, and they're a great use of space as well because they grow up. It means that you can kind of even in a small area get quite a lot heavy yields. I like, for quick impact, I like salad leaf mixes. So you can get packets with several different types of salad leaf, and you just sow them in a row directly, and they will give lots of sort of lovely leafy cuts, which are great for salads, and they save a small fortune on grocery store salads. Potatoes are easy to grow. They're not, they're often quite cheap to buy, but I love them for superior flavor and texture. So I recommend those, and they're a great one to grow with kids because they're very satisfying to unearth. And I must say, I love growing garlic as well. Takes up a relatively small space, and it's very, very easy to grow and so satisfying, and it stores for ages, garlic. So those are that's 5 recommendations, but get a bonus one there. Yeah, great. So I've caught up with the questions I saw, so I'm going back to the comments now to see what else we have here. Let me just get back to where I was. Yes. Yes, answered that one. So Wilma says, we are putting in paths, and it was suggested that we don't mound, but plant in a divot. So there are, we are in the wet climate, but nice hot summer. There isn't runoff as much. And it was just that we don't mound. Oh, I see what you're saying. So you're saying not to grow on raised ground above the paths because the water might run off, but to kind of grow presumably in sort of more of a like a trough, a depression, so it contains the water. Yeah, that's a really good idea if you're in a sort of quite a dry climate, but you're in a wet climate, but nice, hot and sunny. Yeah, so if it's dry and hot in the summer, that's a great way to kind of retain moisture. So one thing I do when I'm growing things like big plants like zucchini is I actually create like a levee, like a ridge all the way around, so I'm actually containing the water. So although I'm in raised beds on a sort of mound, if you like, and then creating a kind of saucer, if you like, that contains the water. So I fill it up with water, it doesn't run off, and it sort of drains through, and that makes a more efficient use of sort of water that way, because not a drop is wasted. So you could do that with things, with other kind of thirsty crops. You could kind of create like a ridge either side of a row of leafy greens that you sow. That'll partly shade it, protect it from sort of some of the wind, and kind of coddle it for, you know, that kind of hot weather. And Wilma, you're also asking how wide my paths are. So my paths are actually narrower than they should be, I'll confess. I think I was too eager to squeeze in too many beds, so there may be only kind of a couple of foot apart, but I would recommend, if you have the space, going for at least 3 foot or even 3.5 foot. So that the idea is you can wander down the paths with the wheelbarrow, and even when there are things billowing over the edges of your beds in the peak of summer, you can still get through unhindered. So that's worth doing. Right. So Cara's asking about the cost of the planner. I think we've got a link somewhere for the finding out more about that. So check the link there, and it'll have all the details, I believe, about pricing. Oh, there we go. Top of it, Josh. Thank you again. Yes. Megan's saying zucchini are definitely bomb-proof until the squash bugs arrive. That's a very good point. You can net them against squash bugs to kind of keep them off when they're most vulnerable. Obviously, once they flower, you need to expose the flowers to be pollinated, but it's a good way of kind of protecting them, at least initially, to help them get going so they're a bit bigger. And then once they do start flowering more profusely, you can remove the covers, and they've got a bit more oomph behind them to hopefully kind of cope a bit better. But yes, I don't get squash bugs where I am, so I'm very blessed, and I I do empathise with you guys that do. Right. So Wilma's also asking about the seedlings. They go asking, so seedlings go from greenhouse to cold frame before planting. So what I do is I do direct sow some root crops, like, for example, parsnip and carrot. Other things, just because I find it easier, I start in pots and little plug trays, usually undercover in the greenhouse. But you know, if it's the middle of summer, it could be outside. And the reason I do that is I can plant them at the exact spacings, and I just know I've got the exact sort of precise number of plants. Not all seedlings go into the cold frame or somewhere sheltered before planting. Most of the cold season crops, like brassicas and so on, they just go straight out. It's the warm season plants that I do put in the cold frame first. So that's things like tomatoes, peppers, squash plants. So they go from the greenhouse, they go into the cold frame for maybe a week. And I open the lid up gradually, open it up during the day, shut it on a chilly night, and then just kind of gradually acclimatize them to the kind of conditions in the garden. But usually by the time I'm planting, it's so mild that very little of that is necessary. But the cold frame is a good kind of halfway house. Katie says, if my raised bed's on my porch due to living on the side of a mountain with no yard, how deep should my beds be? So yes, assume you're saying if they're on like a hard standing, how deep? You can grow some things in as little as 6 inches, but I'd aim for at least 8 and ideally 12 inches of sort of soil there. That means there's plenty for the roots to grow down into. I think anything less than 8 inches is pushing it a bit. So that's the kind of minimum I would say. Luetta, how do you choose varieties of onion and garlic for storage? So often it's just simply reading variety descriptions. So one of the things I love to do at this cooler time of year is just spend hours dreaming about the coming season. So I like to look through catalogues online, and I look for sort of variety descriptions that are specifically marketed as being good for storage. Now, garlic, there are 2 types of garlic. There's hard necks and soft necks, and soft neck varieties are the best for storage. So look for those. And soft necks mean they don't have a hard central stem that produces what's called a scape. So it's just a different type of garlic, but those types tend to store for better. Victoria in Texas. Hello, Victoria. You get full sun all day and have a slope, and you want raised beds. Great stuff. Could they work if I just water them more? Yeah, they certainly could, Victoria. So, yeah, absolutely. I guess, once the plants grow and kind of like flop over the bed, the walls of the bed, it'll sort of help sort of shade the walls of the bed. But yes, raised beds in hot kind of sunny conditions like Southeast Texas probably would need watering more. But I think the secret there is just to top up the soil, the stuff you fill it with every season with sort of fresh organic matter. So you've got a really lovely kind of spongy, good texture of soil that not only drains well in wet weather, but also retains moisture in hot conditions. And I'd also suggest something I haven't touched on today is mulching. So make sure you mulch around your plants. And mulching is just putting a layer of stuff over the surface to shade the soil, and that also slows evaporation of moisture from the soil. So stuff, it could be anything, but I recommend organic stuff. So could be more compost, but things like grass clippings are really great, sprinkled over. Even straw could be good around really sort of sturdy plants like, say, tomatoes, just something to kind of cool the soil. And that's a real lifesaver in hot summers. Even I use them in my often damp climate. Right, have I missed any questions? Is there a link for right? So Cara asks, is there a link for finding more about a cold frame? So mine was several years old, and I can't remember where I bought it, but if you just Google cold frame, there's lots of sort of ideas there for a cold frame. But one thing I might suggest, Cara, is a great way to kind of stretch budget is you can make your own cold frame. So one thing I like to do, I've got these old window panes from double glazed window panes from an old house, and I just put them over the soil but raise them up by making a little box and then just plonk that on top, and that creates a temporary cold frame. So that's a great sort of option as well. And Josh has, I believe, sent some links there as well, so thanks for that, Josh. Right, I'm scanning. I think I've caught up, but yes. So another question from Wilma. Do I put any soil on top before planting? I asked because we put the cardboard, compost and mulch a month ago, but planned for soil on top in spring. I see. So I've started raised beds in many different ways. One bed I did was literally just filled with autumn leaves, and then I just dumped a whole load of sort of quite chunky manure on top from a trusted source, so I knew it was free of any kind of herbicides. Plonked that on top, all rough and ready over the winter, and then in the spring I planted cabbages, and as young as little plugs ready to go, and they did really well. So I didn't need to put any extra stuff on there. I think it depends on what you're growing, whether you're sowing or planting. So if you're going to sow seeds directly into your beds or growing areas, then you might want to finish new beds with a little bit of finer material, like really fine compost or even potting mix. But if you're planting young plants as little plugs or even potted plants, then you could probably get away with sort of lumpier material. So that's what I'd suggest. Right. I think, thanks Gina for your suggestion. Pecan and oat catkins make great mulch. That's really actually a very good point, because the great thing about mulches is that you can use what's available locally to you. So yeah, if you've got a resource that's local, as long as it's sort of an organic material that will eventually rot down, it's really good to make use of that rather than buying expensive stuff from elsewhere. So in my climate, it's got to be grass clippings in the summer, and then I often save autumn leaves and just bank those around plants too. Cara asks, what's the best time that you order your seeds for planting? So the best time to order seeds for planting is yesterday. No, it's really like as soon as possible. If the sooner you order them, the sooner you can kind of get plans ready. So I guess you don't want to rush into it. You want to make a list, edit it down, think carefully about what you're going to kind of eat, and not sort of over order, but order them in as soon as possible, just because there's more choice, and some things, really popular things, might well sell out. So there's no harm in ordering all your garden stuff now while you've got a bit of breathing space, so you can hit the ground running at the end of winter. Wilma says, I only have a few inches above the cardboard, so not sure about planting past the cardboard. That is why my question about added soil. Sorry. Oh, no problem. A few inches above the cardboard. Oh, I see what you mean. So you're saying, sorry, forgive me, saying you got the cardboard and then you got a few inches of material above the cardboard, and is that enough? So cardboard is great for suppressing weeds or grass or whatever, and then you can put your soil amendments on top, your compost and your manure and so on. If there's native soil underneath the cardboard, by the time the roots hit it, you might find that the cardboard started to rot, especially if it's moist, and they can sort of grow into the native soil. But I'd say a couple of inches is possibly on the low side. My beds were probably, what's that, kind of like 5-6 inches deep. So that's kind of something to aim for. But I suppose it depends on the soil underneath and what condition it's in. So yeah, if you've got soil underneath, then maybe a couple of inches is fine. But I'd maybe top it up a bit more if possible, with another few inches, just to be on the safe side. Megan says, I order seeds in early fall based on the previous year, because there is usually, yeah, that's a very good point. There's more available in the fall. Not everyone's got their act in gear, so it's kind of good to jump the gun there and get stuff while you can. Yeah, like to be being prepared and scramble. Yeah, I think so much of garden planning is well, just that, planning ahead. So also things like bamboo canes for growing, climbing, or vining crops up. The really tall ones, these 6-8 foot tall canes, are really useful. But if you go to a garden centre to buy these in kind of late April, early May, when everyone's planting, you might find they've run out. So it's worth ordering as soon as you can, just to be on the safe side, and doing an extra order. Why not? Yeah. You're welcome, Wilma. Right, Michelle, I have seed packets that I bought 2 years ago. Can I still use these? Very good question, Michelle. So most crops, yes, you can use them after 2 years. So different seeds have different life expectancies, and it also depends on how you keep the seeds. So most seeds are fine to use for a couple of seasons, 3 or 4 seasons even. But there are some that are notoriously bad and are worth buying each year. And that really tends to be things in the allium family, so onions, scallions, leeks. I just find that they're kind of useless after 1 season. Also, you can help your seeds store a lot better by keeping them really dry, keeping them cool if possible, definitely out of the sunshine, keeping them in an airtight container. I like to use the little silicone sachets, the desiccant sachets, pop those in with the seeds, clip the box shut, just to make sure no moisture gets in, and those sachets remove the moisture. And then keep it in a cool temperature. If you've got room in the refrigerator, even better, pop them in there. And that way they'll last a few seasons. Usually seed packets on the back will say packed in, that's when they were put in the packet, and then sow by. So just like your food has a use by date, seeds often have a sow by date. So check that. Yeah. Cool. So just to remind you that there is a 7-day free trial of the garden planner. Thank you, Jeremy. I hate putting in my payment details when you just want to try something out and you're not sure, and then you kind of get stung because you've forgotten to. The great thing about the trial is that you don't need to do that at all. It's no payment details. You can just give it a go, and print off your plan at the end if you want. And but I really believe that once you've used it, you will see how powerful it is as a garden tool. And I think for the the kind of extra use you might get out of your space and the sort of efficiency of your cropping year, I think it makes the price well worth it, for sure. I think I'm caught up again, but please, if anyone has any more questions, just drop them in the comments now, or if I've missed a question, just repost it in case I have, and I'll pick that up. But I'll give you a minute or two. But I'm really excited for this year. I think the great thing about being a gardener is that there's a sense of wonderment about it, and childlike wonderment. It's amazing how each spring those first seedlings that come through is impossibly exciting. And I think that's the great joy about being a gardener, is you don't tend to lose that wonder and excitement. So I hope you're kind of full of wonder and excitement for the coming year. So yeah, thanks so much for joining me today, and thank you for your lovely comments there. It's really great. There's a question here from Lisa, sorry if I pronounced it wrong. Says, does the app or the garden planner consider crop rotation? So it does, yes. So if you, let me just if I just quickly share screen, because I can just show you an example of that. So I'm just going to go back and open up another one here, another of my plans, just to show you. Here we are. Right. Just want to quickly show you this because it's quite a cool feature, the crop rotation feature. Okay, so let me share screen, and I'm going to show you a different plan here. This is one from a couple of years ago. So you can see here that yeah, see the gaps here. Now what I'm going to do is, I can't remember where everything was, but if I see, I've got broccoli here, and I'm going to put it in. But can you see there are these sort of red areas? That's where I had brassicas growing in previous years. So if I put it there, then I know that, well, that's not necessarily the best place for it, because recently, because it's flashing red, I had brassicas growing there. So if I try, for example, onions, do a similar thing, you see here. Now, if I show you here, there are different strengths of red. The darker the red means I grew it there more recently than the paler red there. That means it's faded because it's maybe 2 years ago I grew it there. So it's kind of quite a cool little feature for crop rotation. It just really helps to kind of, without you having to sort of remember what you did from year to year, you can just do that. And I tend to, if it's a pale red, just drop it in there anyway, because it's a few years ago. But if you've had a problem with something like white rot for onions, for example, then you know what, you just want to avoid that if you've had a problem on a specific crop, and that crop rotation function really helps. Victoria asks, how deep does a raised bed need to be in a warmer climate? I suppose it's a good question. It depends on the soil underneath the bed, but if you've got a nice, as long as the roots have plenty of resource to grow down into, to be more self-sufficient and self-reliant, and to kind of reach down and cope better with those kind of hot conditions and escape the heat, if you like, then I think that's absolutely fine to kind of just have it quite shallow if it can grow down into the soil beneath it. So I'm sorry, I'm not really answering your question, Victoria, but it depends, I suppose, is the answer. As long as the roots can grow down into sort of cooler conditions down below, then any depth might be appropriate. Cara asks, how deep should the soil be in a regular garden? So again, Cara, I'm thinking like a minimum of 8 inches would be something to aim for, and 12 inches ideally. Things like salad crops are quite shallow rooted, so they could grow in as little as 6 inches. If you think about a pot of plants, you might only be that sort of deep, and you might grow things just fine, radishes, scallions, and so on. But if you're growing something like corn that's quite tall and needs that sort of anchorage at the bottom, or something that's with deep searching roots, carrots are quite deep, then you'd be looking more at a foot. Yeah. Okay, I think we've caught up again. So yeah, okay, well, thank you so much. If there's no more questions, I'm going to let you all get on with your your days. And thank you so much for taking time out to join me. I've really enjoyed this session, and I hope you all have an absolutely stonking 2025 growing season.
Thanks so much, Ben, and everybody who's out there. Please send us your photos throughout the year. We'd love to see what you're working on, and appreciate your support, Ben, and hopefully get some great yields and some great experiences from folks this year.
Quite right.
Appreciate it. Take care.
Thanks, guys.